All right, so welcome to Feature Fridays, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Romain. Romain, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi Guy, thanks for having me today. My name is Romain Decker and I'm a staff technical product manager at VMware.
And you're an expert in NSX, basically, right?
Yeah, I think so. I've been working with NSX since day one, 2013. And I've switched to NSX-T mainly for the 2 or 3 past years.
Yeah, excellent. Well, brilliant to have you on. So thank you very much for coming today. For those who don't know me, my name is Guy Bartram. I'm the Product Marketing Director for Cloud Director. And today I've asked Romain to join us because VCD and NSX obviously have a very kind of tight relationship, and NSX-V is end of life, going end of life. It's no more development. It's going to be in NSX-V. And the support we have for it is going to be limited now. So it's really time that providers start looking at NSX-T, and particularly with Cloud Director 10.2, which is coming out very soon. In Cloud Director 10.2, we've put a lot of work into the NSX-T support, and so trying to get to parity with what V was doing. And I think we've pretty successfully done that within the limits of what NSX-T can do today. So we wanted to talk today about the V to T migration. And Romain, you've got a lot of experience in NSX and obviously in service providers as well. So really, thank you very much for coming on today. And let's kind of take it from the top, right? What are we talking about when we're talking about a V to T migration? What are the key considerations we'll cover today, but how should a provider first start thinking about a V to T migration?
Sure. So outside VCD, when you just talk about NSX, NSX-T has a built-in mechanism to migrate from NSX-V to do an in-place migration. It's using a tool that is embedded in the NSX-T unified appliance that is called the Migration Coordinator. And it works well. But the challenge is that the migration coordinator is not aware about the VCD constructs. So if a service provider has VCD and NSX-V backed data center, we actually developed a different tool that is aware on both on the NSX constructs, the NSX-V constructs, and the VCD constructs. And it's doing a migration using just vMotion, storage vMotion. So it's actually syncing the topology from NSX-V to a new VDC backed by NSX-T. It's doing some L2 bridging using the NSX-T edges, and then it's doing a vMotion and the storage vMotion if required of the workloads. And I can show you a demo on that. Okay. That's in a nutshell.
So yeah, so in summary, if you've got NSX today and you're not using VCD, you're in a better place really if you've got that sort of environment. But if you've got VCD and NSX, it's very good. You're providing a lot more kind of offerings, multi-tenanted public cloud offerings and stuff, but you've got a more complicated layered environment fundamentally. And we have this purpose-built tool to kind of help you with that migration.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's have a look at the tool then. Let's start with, what is the tool and where can people get the tool from?
Yeah, sure. So I'll show you a couple of slides to show.
Okay.
Let me just share my screen.
All right, see your screen now.
Which one do you see?
I see a command line.
Yeah. Okay. So the tool I was talking about is called the NSX Migration for VMware Cloud Director tool. It's basically an external automation tool. So it's developed in Python. It's supported on Linux and Windows. And it allows you to do the migration process with a minimum downtime, and I'll come back to that later. Mm-hmm. So it's actually syncing the metadata, the topology, and migrate workload VMs from an old VDC backed by NSX-V to a new org VDC backed by NSX-T. So the tool will create the new construct, the new org VDC. It will replicate the topology, the edges, the networks, the services that you had on the edge gateways, doing some sanity tests, and then migrate the workload.
So one question I have for you here then is, to manage this migration, do I need a whole new cluster set up for T?
Yes. Okay. So because you cannot have NSX-V and NSX-T installed at the same time on a single host, we need some additional capacity to do the migration. But you can also think about if you have enough capacity in a cluster, if a cluster is not maxed out, you can think about removing some hosts and creating a new NSX-T cluster using those hosts. So you're just using a swinging mechanism. So you remove a few hosts from the NSX-V backed cluster, create a new NSX-T, and then during the migration, when you're like freeing some capacity, you can just continue to add, to change those NSX-V hosts into NSX-T hosts.
Okay, so I don't necessarily need to go and purchase a whole load of new hardware and build a whole new cluster with VCD and NSX on. I can actually repurpose, if there's spare capacity, hosts within my existing cluster for this migration.
Yes.
Okay, that's cool. All right.
And yeah, it's not part of the VCD installation, and you need an external machine, so Linux or Windows. And finally, the minimum downtime is done using L2 bridging. So the NSX-T side can do software layer 2 bridging. So we are doing bridging from the VXLAN on NSX-V to Geneve on NSX-T. And it's using NSX-T edge nodes to do that you have to provision before the migration.
And if I've got, you said all the metadata and things like that is copied across and migrated, but if I've got things like distributed firewalling and distributed load balancing already in my V environment, that's going to maintain its secure posture throughout this migration into T?
So the tool can migrate the features that VCD supports. So the current VCD version 10.1 doesn't support yet DFW for NSX-T, but it will support it in the next version in 10.2 that will be released soon. So at that moment, when when VCD 10.2 will be released, the next version of the tool will support DFW roles migration.
But if I had been, as a provider, providing a managed service and doing some of the distributed firewalling at the back end, actually in NSX, so is this going to allow for that?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
So if I've been, providing a managed service with some self-serve, the customer is spinning up VMs, but at the back end, I'm creating the distributed policies in NSX for that customer and making sure that distributed firewalling is working for that customer at the back end, even though it's a VCD environment with NSX-V.
No, in that case, it's not. The migration tool will not be aware of those rules. So it's connecting to VCD and it's really syncing the VCD construct. So if VCD is not aware of the DAW rules for some reason, it will not migrate them.
Okay, that's fine. Just good to know. So basically, this tool is looking at VCD primarily and all of the NSX-V functionality that can be done in VCD with NSX-V. Yeah, okay. Okay.
So I know where to find the tool. Basically on vmware.com/downloads, you just go in your normal VCD section and you have there a driver tools tab, where the first one is the VMware NSX Migration for VMware Cloud Director. So it's a tool that is developed separately from VCD. So we don't have the same release process and the same release cadence as VCD.
Right. And I see there's 1.0 and a 1.1. I guess you'd use the...
Yes. Yeah, always the latest. And we will have a 1.2 version coming just after the next VCD release.
Okay, Is it best to wait for that one? Is there going to be, additional functionality, or is this just enhanced?
Yeah, we are actually having new features in the 1.2 to migrate some of the new VCD functionality for NSX-T, like DFW. So you will be able to migrate DFW rules with the 1.2 version. We will also support the migration of load balancing from NSX-V to NSX ALB, so Advanced Load Balancer.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting. All right.
Okay. So a few additional information. Something really important is the granularity of the migration. It's a per org VDC migration. So it's not a per VC cluster. It's not per provider VDC. It's really per org VDC. So that's the unit of granularity of the migration. It's doing so because the networks are extended between NSX-V and NSX-T. We have minimum downtime, and we're also doing a live migration. At some point when the tool is ending the migration, you are at the point where you have to validate that everything was migrated, that your application is working, that everything is available. And then you can do a cleanup using the tool CLI, where it will actually remove the source org VDC, which will be empty. It will remove the metadata that we used during the migration, and it will remove the NSX-T edge, the NSX bridging configuration that was used during the migration.
So it does allow then for rollback until you've removed.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The tool actually has some really nice features in terms of like they're built in the tool. Like you have a pre-check mode where it's actually checking everything if you have all of the requirements to do the migration. If you don't have, it will list what's failing, what needs to be changed before launching the migration. Mm-hmm. If the tool is quit because of an error, because of something that was unexpected during the migration, because if it's production, you have live operation during the migrations. Or if you quit, if you launch the tool again, it will resume where it stopped. It will not start again. So it's using metadata to do that. And if you have an issue, you can do a rollback.
Okay. So when we're talking about live migration, vMotion, we're talking about a couple of packets being lost, being the kind of worst case, right?
For East-West, the latest test that we did, for East-West, it was very minimum. So it was 2 to 3 packets between the VMs when we actually do the vMotion. For north-south traffic, it was a couple of minutes because you have to reestablish the connectivity to different edges. And you have to copy some routing, you have to copy some NAT rules and some edge firewall rules and stuff. So it was a couple of minutes, but we are looking to improve that.
Okay, that's fine. And from that point on, after you've done the migration and you've done the cleanup for that org, from that point on, the tenant that accesses that org, any kind of networking or security changes that he makes will be then implemented in T. The system now knows that that org is managed by T and not by V, and effectively the different instance. Okay. There's no additional tasks that need to be done there.
No. So let me actually show you the tool.
What's the the buffer hardware that you listed there as well? There was a bullet saying buffer hardware required for new cluster.
Yeah, that's what we discussed a few minutes ago. It means that you need a new NSX-T cluster to start the migration.
Sure. Okay.
So quickly on vmware.com/downloads, if you go on VMware Cloud Director, on the product, You have driver and tools. And there you have VMware NSX Migration for VCD. In there, you have a few things. You have the most important one is the documentation. It's a PDF. And then you have the binaries for Windows and for Linux, and also the release notes.
Right.
Now, I will just quickly mention. So before doing the migration, you have some prep work to do. That's my vCenter. I have my NSX-V cluster, where I have some orgs and some org VDC. And I provisioned an NSX-T cluster, which is empty for now. Mm-hmm. On NSX-T, the prep work consists only in creating a few edge nodes that will be used for bridging. So the number of edge nodes to create for bridging will depend on the number of organization networks to migrate. The way layer 2 bridging is working, we need to have a one-to-one mapping between the source organization network to migrate and the edge node used for bridging. So if we have 3 org networks to migrate, we need to have 3 edge nodes for bridging. So I have created a few edge nodes that I mapped in a NSX-T edge cluster. Then those are just prepared, but not running bridging. So the tool will create the bridging and configure everything in NSX-T for us.
If you've got multiple networks or your org, do you then need multiple edges, or is it just to the org?
Yes.
Right.
If I have 2 org networks, I need to have 2 edge transport nodes. So I have, here in my example, I have 2 edge nodes that will be used for bridging.
And what about VApp networks?
So NSX-T in VCD doesn't support yet all the VApp networks. We only support isolated VApp networks for the moment.
Okay.
So if you have an isolated VApp network, the tool supports it, and it will use one edge node to do the bridging of that.
Sure. Okay.
You also obviously have to prepare the NSX cluster. So I have prepared my hosts. So it's actually installing the VIBs and making sure that the overlay is working between them. And the final step is to prepare a T0. So in NSX-T, a T0 is what's making the boundary between the physical network and the overlay network. Like it's the first hop into the overlay. Mm-hmm. And I've prepared a T0 gateway that is here. It's T0 pod 2 shared. And this one is imported into VCD. So I stop configuring NSX at this point, and I import the external network. So I imported the T0 as an external network in VCD.
Okay, so VCD knows how to reach the T0, and then behind the T0, you're going to have a T1 for each org.
Yes.
Yeah.
So each, with the NSX-T and VCD integration, each edge gateway that you create has an NSX-T construct. So if it's backed by, I don't have any backed or VDC backed by NSX-T here, but if you create an edge gateway for an NSX-T backed org VDC, it will create a tier 1 gateway in NSX-T.
Okay, yeah. And
the good thing is that in NSX-T, T0 and tier 1, they are automatically connected, and the routing is done automatically by NSX-T. So you don't have anything to configure in NSX-T. So you compare with NSX-V, you had the concept of ESD and DLR, and you had to do manually the routing or using some automation, some scripting. But in NSX-T, it's actually auto-plumbed and automatically routed.
Okay. Is that, if you've then got overlapping address spaces, is that where the VRF-like functionality comes in? Or is that a different piece?
So there are multiple constructs here. So if you have, so in the NSX-T integration with VCD, you can have shared T0 that can be shared between multiple edge gateways. You have dedicated T0 that are dedicated to one edge gateway. And in the next version, we will have the support of VRF in NSX-T, where we can use up to 100 VRF in one T0. And so each VDC can use its own VRF if they want to. So it means that we don't have to create additional T0 if we want to provide dedicated routing to a specific tenant or to a specific edge.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
I also imported my provider VDC. So that's my NSX-T. That's my NSX-T backed cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And then the preparation is ready. So in terms of, so I have a T1 tenant that has 2 org VDC.
Right, so your baseline is deploy the cluster, configure the T1 in VCD, configure the PVDCs for your environment in VCD, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, configure the external network.
Yeah.
And so for the sake of time of this demo, I have a web VM that has an address that has some, it's a single network. I have an edge where I have some NAT rules to source NAT and destination NAT to access the VM.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I can show the tool now. So the tool is actually, so it's a CLI-based tool. It's in Python. So it contains a single exec and some libraries and some, one input file. So the tool itself has like a normal CLI tool and inbuilt help.
Yep.
So you see all the options that I can do. So the first one is the pre-check. So you see that I have to pass, actually, I can pass a password file and I can pass a file path that will contain the spec file. It's a YAML file that contains all the configuration, like where do I want to connect? What's the center? What's the VCD? So this file it's a YAML file. So it contains like the IP of the vCloud Director, the username, the source org VDC that I want to migrate. It's my T1 OVDC1. What I prepared on NSX-T. So the provider VDC, so that's the destination provider VDC. The external network that I imported into VCD. That's the source. I also need to provide dummy external network that is not connected to anything. You can just provide dummy IP addresses there. I just put like, I don't remember if it was 192.168 addresses or 1110. That's because we need, when we disconnect the NSX-V edge gateway, we need to connect it to something. It cannot be, an NSX-V gateway cannot be disconnected completely from everything. So when we disconnect it, we just connect it to that dummy network. And then some information for NSX-T, the edge cluster that will be used for bridging, and the transport zone that will be used for bridging. And when you have everything here, you can launch a pre-check.
So that YAML file, there's obviously an example YAML file there, which you then have to fill out with the data that we've just shown.
Yes.
And I guess the pre-check is then going to go and validate that all those things exist and you've made the correct spelling and things like that.
Yeah, so it's actually doing a little more than that. So it's connecting to everything. So to VCD, to NSX, and to vCenter, it's checking that what I actually declared in the file is correct, but it's actually also validating if all requirements for the tools are met. If I remember correctly, it will fail here because I'm missing one small requirement. So it's checking like the edge gateway services, what services do they run? Like I have NAT, but if you have VPN, if you have load balancing, if you have central centralized firewall rules. So here it's failing. So I have fast provisioning enabled on my source org VDC. And so I can go back here and check my org VDC. And I have fast provisioning enabled. So if I disable that and I launch the pre-check again, it will be successful.
Okay.
What I can do is actually launching the actual migration. So to do the migration, I'm just removing the pre-check argument and I'm launching the migration. So it will, it will actually validate again a few things, and then it will start with the migration. So the first step is to create a new organization VDC that will appear here. It will be suffixed by -t. So during the migration, every new construct will have a suffix -t. So the edge gateway, sorry, not the edge gateway, but the organization VDC and some other components. And at the end, when you do the cleanup, it will remove the source objects and it will rename the new objects by removing the -t. So that you have the same naming convention at the end.
Got it.
So here it started. So it actually disabled first my T1 VDC so that we cannot provision on it during the migration. So we see that it's successfully completed by the migration validation task. And it's, as I mentioned, the tool is using a lot of metadata to manage the migration.
Okay.
So you see a lot of tasks are updating metadata. So for every step, it will update metadata on the source and target of VDC. So you see that now I have a new organization VDC that has a -t suffix. It's backed by NSX-T, and it's on my provider VDC -t. So I can check on the vCenter. I see that it's actually creating things. The metadata that I mentioned are anything that the tool has to know, and also the status of the migration. Check the metadata. So you can check, it's about like it's the configuration, the external networks, and so on.
Is there, I'm not familiar with this, but is there custom metadata there that can be put in? Is that carried over if there is?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything that exists on the source org VDC will be migrated.
Okay.
So some of the features or the constructs on the source org VDC can be migrated as is because they are the same. If it's NSX-V or NSX-T, like metadata, you don't care if it's an NSX-V or NSX-T backed org VDC. But some of the features that you are using on source org VDC will be translated into the equivalent NSX-T. But it's an equivalent. It's not the exact same function.
Yeah, okay.
So NAT is not working the same way in NSX-T as in NSX-V, but the tool translates everything for you.
Okay, got it.
So it's while it's continuing, I just want to show you in the slides what it's actually doing the backend.
Okay.
So in terms of architecture, so that's a high level of what I described. So we have on the right, we have I cannot know. Can I annotate? And yeah, so we have the NSX-T PVDC that we have created. So it's actually represented by my NSX-T vSphere cluster. We have created the T0 gateway. So, and then we established routing with the physical external routers.
Yep.
And the external networks during the migration will be actually bridged to the destination network. The network will be bridged here, here, and here. And at the end, the traffic will be stopped here, and the traffic will go here. So even if the VMs are still on the left, traffic will go through T0, T1, and go via the bridging to reach the VMs, and then the VMs will be migrated to the destination.
And I guess if customers had VMs in multiple orgs that were communicating with each other, then that routing would be carried across to the T1.
So there are two things here. Two different use cases. One, if a customer provider has VMs communicating between each other in two different org VDC.
Yeah.
So the communication is so the tool doesn't know if it's the same customer or if the VMs communicate to each other. For the tool, it's the same. It will just carry on the migration, and the VMs will be able to talk to each other after the minimal downtime of a couple of minutes. If it's a shared network between two org VDC, the tool doesn't support that yet. The reason is that it's actually complex to migrate multiple org VDC at the same time.
Right.
So if we have shared network, we would have to migrate all the org VDC that are defined by the shared networks at the same time. And that's something that we have to decide on how to do it using the tool.
So if you did have shared networks today, then the answer would be to arrange for some downtime whilst the migration of both of those orgs, and then essentially the shared network would work, but it would work on a T environment rather than a V environment.
Yes, and the shared, the how to share networks is not exactly done the same way in NSX-T, and you have to wait for the next release of BCD to be able to do that.
Okay. 10.2.
Yes.
Cool.
So a couple of points regarding performance. So if you have a large number of org, we have providers that have hundreds, potentially thousands of org VDC. It's not a concern because of the granularity. Free capacity for the target cluster. As I mentioned, if your NSX-V clusters are not maxed out, you can remove a few hosts, start a new NSX-T cluster, and then swing hosts from one cluster to the other.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not perfect, but at least it avoids potentially buying new hosts.
Yeah.
And if you don't have shared storage across source and destination, so if you don't have FSIQZ or FC, the tool will do a storage vMotion.
Okay.
So it has an impact on the length of the migration. If it's the same storage, it's just a regular vMotion. So it's just a normal vSphere vMotion. And yeah, we are using metadata to save the state. And that's a small animation that shows actually what it's doing. So step A was what we did as a preparation work. So if NSX-T was not installed before, you have to install it. You have to create the T0 and the edge required for the bridging. And then we import the T0 as an external network, and it's ready. The migration itself creates the target VDC, the target edge, the target networks, sync the topology, the services that you are using, the metadata, and then finish by doing a vMotion across the source and the target of VDC. At this moment, the script, when the migration is successful, the script stops, and you have the opportunity to validate that the migration was successful by testing your application. And when you validate that the application the application is working as expected, you can complete the migration. So you relaunch the tool using a -- cleanup argument, and it will clean everything at the source side. It will clean the NSX-T bridging configuration that was left on NSX-T. If for some reason unexpected, the application is not in the state you want, you can do a rollback, which is automatic.
And that will vMotion back.
Yes.
Will it clean up all of the parts in stage B?
Yes, it cleans up everything.
Okay.
So let's check where our migration is. So migration continues in backend. So it created the target for VDC, so T1 or VDC1. It synced the VM placement policy, the target networks. So it disconnected the target networks and then configured the NSX-T bridging. It's actually doing now a bridging connectivity test. So it verifies that the bridging is working between the VXLAN and the Geneve segments. So that's taking a few minutes. And after that, it will copy and sync the topology for the edge gateway. So you see that the bridging connectivity test was successful. And then it will continue with, if I remember correctly, NAT holes and firewall holes and so on. So in terms of, in terms of networks, so now in my tenant view, I have my source org VDC, T1 or VDC1, but I have my destination org VDC as well. It has a -T suffix, and it's currently being filled up. So I have my network, which is named V to T. For the moment, it's isolated because it was disconnected by the tool, but it will be reconnected at some point during the migration.
Yeah.
So NAT rules are getting configured on the destination. So I have my edge here. So I have a first NAT rule that was created. The second will be created in a minute.
Yeah.
And then it continues. And it updates the metadata. So that's the message that you will see most of the time, because it's for each step, it's logging the step using the metadata in the VDC.
Yeah, it's giving you some nice verbose log out there as well, which is great. And I guess there's timeouts and timings to allow all of these tasks to complete, and then checking the task, etc. So it's going to be quite lengthy script. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the script, so if you go in the YAML file, it's T1. So at the end, you have actually the number of threads and the timeout for the app migration that you allow. So you can play with those to allow for some timeout. So those are the default.
Yeah. At your peril.
Yeah. So NAT rules are getting configured and so on. Yeah, I don't know if you will see the end state of the migration.
Yeah,
because it's actually doing a lot of checks during the migration to ensure that everything is okay, as we are talking about production. But yeah, it's working great.
Yeah, I can see. Listen, thank you, Romain. That's been really good to kind of walk through that, and also it's been really interesting to see some of the limitations, some of the considerations I think that service providers have had to or need to take into account when looking at this. So, any final thoughts from you on the tool and the migration itself?
No, I was. I think I mean it's a migration at the end, so it's not as easy as an update, but the tool helps really with the migration. And we actually having a high pace of development for this tool, which will be released more often than VCV. So we will support more and more features and more services to migrate in the future. So if you have any questions, just reach out to us, and you can also test the tool. It's free to use. So don't hesitate to download it and to have a look at the documentation or just to test it.
Yeah. And I think importantly, understand what your environment is using today and check the release notes of each issue of the scripts, so you know that those functions are covered or not, and wait for the next script.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the user guide that you can download with the tool is actually quite well done. So it will just explain you what topology we support, what features we support to migrate, which we don't. Prerequisites, how to, if you're not familiar on how to prepare an edge cluster for Beijing in NSX-T, it's described with screenshots. So it's quite well described. The tool itself is also, all the parameters that you can have in the YAML file are described. And then like all the, what it can do, pre-check, the password file, the rollback. Also the two last pages, you're actually describing every step that the tool is doing if you're interested to know that.
Yeah, it's really good. It's really good. This is definitely a case of read the manual. Yeah, okay. Brilliant. Well, listen, Romain, thank you very much for being on Feature Fridays and stepping us through this utility that we have, and you know, giving us all of your knowledge on that. Thank you.